Coatbridge, The Disappearance of Moira Anderson, an Audible original. I don't know what the purpose of this podcast is. Therapy for the narrator? While this is supposedly about the disappearance of Moira Anderson, the whole of episode 2 is taken up by Sandra Brown talking about her relationship with her lecherous, abusive father. Why? She tries to link him to the disappearance of Moira, but there's no proof. There's not even anyone she can talk to about it, as the only other person who believed this, her grandfather, is dead. But that doesn't stop Sandra pursuing this. The rest of the podcast is about her doggedly trying to prove that her father is the presumed murderer, based on nothing more than a hunch and the fact that he abused young girls. He may have driven the bus the girl was last seen on. He may have been a passenger on the bus. It's never clear. At one point, she eventually decides to go to the police and is shocked, dismayed even, that the police are treating this disappearance as a disappearance and not a murder. The police confirm that for it to be classified as a murder, there would need to be a body. She wonders what her investigations will do to her family, siblings and mother, her own family, husband and children, and the family of the little girl who disappeared. She even wonders what it will do to Coatbridge itself. She clearly has inflated ideas about her own self-importance. Why would Coatbridge care what an unknown actress has to say about a disappearance nearly 70 years ago, bearing in mind she has no proof? The podcast gets more and more bizarre, with a visit to not one, but two psychics, one of whom tells her that Moira forgives her murderer. Definitely not just a case of the psychic telling Sandra what she wanted to hear. Sandra claims that some psychics have a reputation as swindlers. No hen, they all do. Based on the word of a second psychic, private land is dug up, 4 meters deep by the way. They find, as predicted, a small green glass bottle with a broken neck. This is supposed to be the bottle that contained the chloroform used to subdue Moira. If you can believe it, there's no evidence of what was inside. But we're supposed to believe it's what she says it is. It couldn't just be something randomly found in the ground. Based on hearsay, they dig up the grave of someone who was buried the same time Moira went missing. Getting permission involved various levels of bureaucracy, and when it was eventually allowed to go ahead, it took 3 days. 3 sets of families had their loved ones' remains disturbed for this. Guess what? No body. What a shock. The narrator said that as a child, she once saw 2 girls looking into her dad's car when it was parked beside a big park, and she never understood it. Decades later, she realized one of those girls was Moira. 1, she never knew Moira at the time. 2, Moira was 3 years older than her. Why did she suddenly remember, decades later, clearly that it was Moira that was looking into the car and not someone else? It would be like you, at 40, remembering clearly a girl behaving suspiciously in a park when you were 8, a girl you had never seen before or since, but you know it's her. It's just utterly ridiculous. In 2013, I think, a new witness came forward saying she remembered seeing a girl in a blue jacket with a pink pixie hat on that specific day in 1957. How do people have these fantastic memories of specific days almost 60 years later? It just beggars belief. There's a part about a convict admitting to it and implicating Sandra's dad, but his story is demonstrated to be pure fantasy. Nonetheless, Sandra believes him. What I disliked most is the narration. It's excruciating. It's like an adult reading a fantasy story to a child or someone with learning difficulties. The intonation is all over the place and rarely, if ever, appropriate. It's like there's an exclamation mark at the end of most sentences. It is actually stressful to listen to as it feels patronizing. People don't talk like that. One of the many problems with the podcast is that Sandra repeats the same things over and over, treating us like imbeciles. This could be over in at least half the time. Finally, I must talk about the sound design. As seems to be the norm for these things produced in Dolby Atmos, the sound shifts from left to right for no reason. Sometimes I'd even describe it as wobbling from left to right. I'm not just talking about 2 people in a conversation where one person is in the left channel and the other is in the right. Sandra can be talking and she shifts around, sometimes more to the left, sometimes right in the center, sometimes on the right, all within one sentence. It's extremely annoying. Coupled with Sandra's poor narrative style, it just serves as another hindrance to enjoying this podcast. At one point, Sandra says, resorting to one of the many cliches that this thing is peppered with, that Moira was failed by the very people who were supposed to protect her. I'm afraid Moira has also been failed by Sandra. Sandra tells us that she wrote an autobiography based on the story, which she then turned into a one-woman show she has performed in several, unnamed, places, apart from Edinburgh. She really is getting value for money from that poor little girl. The podcast has no proper ending. The little girl has never been found, and we are no closer to finding out what happened, but I'm sure it was a very cathartic experience for Sandra Brown, and that seems to be the most important thing. That and getting her name out there and doing her damnedest to associate herself with a story that has nothing to do with her. Would I listen to another true crime podcast? Yes, if not produced by the same people. Would I listen to another podcast or audiobook narrated by Sandra Brown? No way, Jose. All in all, I'd give this podcast 1 out of 5, and I'd give the narrator 1 out of 5 as well. Have you listened to this podcast? What did you think? Did you find the story credible? This is one of the reviews that was not accepted for publication by Audible.